Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines this hour. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he will meet US President Donald Trump later this month and claims the second phase of Washington's Gaza plan is, quote, close. He says the talks will focus on ending Hamas rule and advancing peace as negotiations continue. A magnitude 7 earthquake has struck near Yucatan, Alaska, according to the US Geological Survey. The quake hit at a depth of 10 kilometers with no immediate reports of damage or casualties. Russia's Dmitry Medvedev says the new US national security strategy shows Washington is ready to discuss a broader security architecture. He says Moscow will study these signals but warns any talks must address Russia's core strategic concerns. Outgoing US envoy to Ukraine says a peace deal to end the war is really close and remaining issues include Ukraine's Donbass region and one of Ukraine's main nuclear power plants. He also claims that both sides have suffered 2 million casualties during the near 4-year war. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says he fully supports the decision to launch a second strike on a suspected drug boat in the Caribbean. He says he would have made the same call himself as questions grow over reports that 2 survivors were targeted in the follow-up attack. The US National Park Service says it will drop Martin Luther King Jr. Day and Juneteenth from its fee-free entrance days as part of President Trump's new modernization plan. Police in North Carolina charge a 33-year-old man with attempted murder after a rider is stabbed on a Charlotte commuter train. Officers say the suspect, who was previously deported, used a large knife and the victim remains in critical but stable condition. Japan says Chinese fighter jets locked their radar on Japanese military aircraft in 2 dangerous incidents near Okinawa, calling the action extremely regrettable. Tokyo has launched a formal protest while Beijing disputes the account as regional tensions rise over Taiwan and military drills. We start this hour in Europe, and Russia says the new US national security strategy largely aligns with Moscow's own world view, calling it a significant shift in Washington's approach. The Kremlin has welcomed US President Donald Trump's decision to stop describing Russia as a direct threat, saying the change opens the door for dialogue. Russian Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev says the updated strategy signals US readiness to discuss global security architecture. He noted that the document refers to Russia as a participant in dialogue on strategic stability and includes language on halting NATO expansion without mentioning Ukraine. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov also described the changes as encouraging, though he cautioned that not all US institutions may share this view. Meanwhile, concerns are emerging in Europe. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk warned that something has changed in EU-US relations, stressing that Europe must remain Washington's closest ally. His remarks follow US warnings that Europe could face long-term economic and security decline, raising fresh questions about transatlantic ties. We're now joined by Alison Mutler. She is the former Associated Press bureau chief in Romania. She joins us live from the capital, that is Bucharest. Thank you, Alison, for joining us very much on this matter. Russia, no longer described as a national security threat in the United States in this report, with Donald Trump's signature at the bottom. Does that mean Vladimir Putin, after everything, has charmed the US president this time?
Donald Trump feels some kind of affinity with Vladimir Putin. He sees him as a strong leader. He sees Russia as a big country, and He's very much opposed to this ongoing war, which, as you said earlier, has claimed 2 million lives. He wants it to stop, and he wants to do business. So he is seeing Vladimir Putin, he's ignoring all the human rights abuses, the fact that he's a dictator, that it's a very corrupt country, and he's focusing on trying to build a pragmatic relationship with Vladimir Putin. In Europe, Vladimir Putin is something, well, not something, he is a pariah. And that's something that Russia finds very difficult, that Vladimir Putin finds very difficult. So it's very welcoming of these overtures by Donald Trump. It's a shift in the US position toward Russia. It's a sign, I think, that Donald Trump really wants to get this war done and dusted.
And what about the language towards NATO? Apologies, Europe in this document. Of course, Donald Trump has, of course, been very much against Europeans' immigration policies. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think Trump wants to bring Europe to heel. He wants them to behave in a way that he finds easy to deal with. Trump is a big picture person. He likes big countries, China, India, Russia. He finds Europe problematic. You have all these countries, they have strong economies, they're liberal democracies, which is something that Donald Trump doesn't like. So I think he doesn't want to stop relations or strategic relationships or economic ties with Europe, but he finds it rather problematic. And he doesn't want Europe to be a power in the world. He obviously wants a world in which big countries do business, and Europe is problematic. But by the same token, he doesn't actually want to break relations with Europe. But there is definitely a shift, and he finds Europe, or the MAGA side of his political policy, finds Europe annoying. There's too many countries, they have too many opinions, and they're rich countries. We're not talking about poor countries. So he finds Europe standing in the way of his desire to do a quick peace, I think, with Russia. But, geographically, Europe is the continent that will face Russian aggression, not America. So there are differences of differing interests here and differing positions. But Trump naturally feels more aligned to the big countries, and he finds Europe, I think, rather annoying, like a fly or something.
Yes, and Alison, of course, there's throughout these peace negotiations, a common bullet point coming out of the Russian side is that Ukraine cannot join NATO. This framework, national security strategy, includes language on halting NATO expansion. Why would Donald Trump want to do that?
Well, Russia has said so before. It is very opposed to NATO expansion. And Donald Trump doesn't want any more problems in the region. So he thinks that if Vladimir Putin thinks NATO expansion is a problem, then he will agree with it. NATO actually is a defensive military alliance. It's not an aggressive. NATO doesn't go around attacking other countries. It's an alliance of 20, I can't remember how many nations, but it's a defensive alliance. It protects its countries, it protects its allies. And it's quite ironic that since Russia staged its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, NATO has expanded. Finland, which was historically neutral, Sweden also, they have joined NATO to protect themselves defensively from their fears of Russian aggression. But I think Donald Trump agrees with Vladimir Putin. This is obviously a big sticking point for Vladimir Putin, and he sees we can't have any more NATO members. He doesn't mention any countries. The only countries, I think, that wanted to join NATO, but there was never any timescale, never any plan for Ukraine to join NATO. It was just something that was granted to Ukraine in 2008 in Bucharest, but nothing has been done for Ukraine to become a member. But Vladimir Putin wants a veto on it for Ukraine never to become a member. He doesn't want a democratic country on his board, a big democratic country, because Ukraine is a big country. He doesn't want any expansion of NATO. He says he doesn't mind the European Union, but I have my doubts about it. It's too close for home. You know, if you have a democratic country on your borders, it could, quote unquote, infect your own country. And Russia is not a democratic country. And under Vladimir Putin, it cannot become a democratic country.
Yes, Alison, do stay with us as we have further updates coming out of the region. And Yuri Ushakov, a senior Russian diplomat, has stated that Russian military gains on the front lines are creating a more favorable environment for talks with the United States on Ukraine. Yuri Ushakov also mentioned that progress was made during a meeting between President Vladimir Putin and US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, allowing both sides to better understand each other's positions. He also clarified that a potential meeting between Putin and President Trump was not discussed. He added that Washington now has a clearer view of Russia's position, while the Kremlin says Ukraine's situation has worsened since earlier negotiations. Alison, of course, we can speak about the gains which Moscow has reportedly made on the front lines of eastern Ukraine. However, let's not do that. Let's talk about how the leverage, the possible leverage that it's giving Moscow in these diplomatic negotiations. There we have a senior Russian diplomat saying it loudly and proudly that it's giving Russia strength in these talks. What does that mean for the longevity of international law?
Russia has been claiming for the past weeks, even a couple of months, that it's making big gains in eastern Ukraine. And it's been using this, as you said, for leverage. It's been saying, trying to show Washington, look, we're doing well. There's no way Ukraine can win. And therefore, you have to take our position very seriously. So, but the problem is, it's very hard to verify these reports because Ukraine denies, pushes back against these claims. And we haven't had any real, or public sources, we haven't had any real confirmation of how many gains they've made. But the point of these gains, whether they are real, which we don't know, or whether they are just being reported by the Kremlin, is it wants to show Russia that it has a strong hand. As we know, Donald Trump believes in strong hands. His famous dressing down of Zelensky in February in the Oval Office was, you don't have any cards, you don't have a strong hand. So Russia really needs to project a very strong image that it is winning on the battlefield, even though it's taken almost 4 years. And they've occupied very little territory compared to what their original plans were. So Russia has to show that it is in a stronger position, and its message to Washington and the world is Ukraine is losing, Ukraine can't win, we're the big country. Even though militarily, they are pretty poor, the Russians.
Yes, Alison, do stay with us as we have further information coming out. Russian presidential press secretary Dmitry Peskov says that no one wants to share responsibility for the potential seizure of Russian assets with Belgium, but everyone wants to have this money. According to Peskov, there are about 210 billion euros worth of immobilized Russian assets in Europe, including 185 billion held by Belgium's Euroclear. That is why Belgium opposes the European Commission's plan for the distribution of Russian sovereign assets blocked in Europe under the guise of a reparations loan to Ukraine, as it is afraid of Russia's potential response. This comes as EU leaders are currently debating plans to use the assets as collateral for a large loan to Ukraine, although the primary hurdle remains Belgium's demand for explicit guarantees that all EU nations will share the burden of risk. Alison, what is the burden of risk in this plan, in using all these frozen Russian assets in the European Union to give Ukraine a sort of reparations loan? What risk does it cause?
Belgium, an important country. It has the European Commission, the European Union, and other international organizations there, but it's a small country. And it's a democratic country. The rule of law is important there. It doesn't rank highly in corruption. So it likes to play things by the book. And Russia is a big world player and could easily, sue Belgium. Belgium really does not want to be involved in an international court case with Russia over these assets, which are politically very, very sensitive. And therefore it's demanding, I think quite fairly, that the European Union members, 27 of them, share the burden of the risk. Belgium does not want to be seen to seize these assets. It doesn't want this political problem, to have this political problem. So Peskov is right in what he says, and it is a threat, but it is also a very real possibility. What happens to these assets? I mean, perhaps further along the line, when we have signed some kind of peace talk, no, we're having peace, but when we have sort of some peace deal, then there'll be a joint decision what to do with those assets, whether a part of those assets will be used for reparations to Ukraine as a loan or as a grant. But I think for Belgium, it's far too risky as a small country, a relatively small country, but a rich country, an important country, a democratic country, to take on this risk.
Yes, Alison Muttler, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you on these matters. We now move on, and French President Emmanuel Macron has reportedly threatened Beijing with tariffs on Chinese goods shortly after returning from a 3-day visit to China earlier this week. In a recent interview given to a French newspaper, Macron has stated that a negotiated solution is still possible to address the massive trade deficit between the European Union and China, which happens to the world's second largest economy. According to the French president, if China fails to take steps to reduce the trade surplus, the European nations will be, quote, forced to take strong measures in the coming months. He has further added that these measures could be modelled on the tariff-related steps taken by US President Donald Trump in the last few months. As per reports, the EU's trade deficit with China was estimated to be over $350 billion in 2024. And it is important to take note that France had earlier in the past sought to have a firmer European conduct in dealing with China, pushing the EU bloc to deploy protectionist countermeasures, which could have helped to slow down the arrival of Chinese goods into the European markets, which the French president claimed was hampering the EU industry. Okay, joining us now is Major General Gigi Davidi. He's an international relations and defense expert, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Major General Gigi Davidi, French President Emmanuel Macron has just said that he is considering putting tariffs on Beijing just 2 days after a visit to China. Is this the new norm of the trade world following Donald Trump's actions of his second term?
Well, Thomas, firstly, always a pleasure to be on the NewsX World. Well, you have given a background, but I'll just take on from where you left. The point is that currently there is a serious trade imbalance between France and China, and of course, as a European Union as a whole. And you rightly give the figures that today it is about $350 billion. And incidentally, President Macron was in China only a few days back on a 3-day visit. It was the 4th visit. And it is obvious that he has not been able to extract any concession from President Xi Jinping. While President Xi Jinping went out of the way, broke the protocol and hosted Macron in Chengdu, which they never do because they never go beyond Beijing. Now the point is that this issue has to be tackled by the EU collectively, because there's a caveat. And caveat is that no one country can strike any deal, whether it's a trade deal or deficit. It has to be done as a European Union as a whole. So that's why President Macron has been trying to get the same collective response of the European Union. while some of the countries are not on the same page, like Germany has a huge presence in China, and they may not be willing to go along. And there are two more issues that have come up. One is that, after America imposed sanctions on China, all the goods that were meant for America now are being dumped in Europe, and that has aggravated the problem. So therefore, Europe is caught between the rock and the hard place, and the only response is collective response, where they should be able to deal with China and bring down the deficit and make the trade more balanced and on the equal footing. But as it appears now, until they take a strong stance, and one of the measures recommended by President Macron was that they will go in for tariffs on the model of America, and but at the same time, he sounded a caution note that still the trade deal is possible with China. Thomas.
Yes, Major General G.D. Davidi, thank you very much for that explanation, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you here on NewsX World. We now move on, and Germany's Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul is scheduled to visit China tomorrow, which will be his very first trip to the country. This comes at a time when trade tensions between Beijing and EU countries remain intense, particularly in the matters of chips, minerals, steel and electric vehicles. Let's listen in to what Wadephul had to say on the discussions that he could be holding during his upcoming trip to China.
Wir haben einander heute viel anzubieten. Gleichzeitig werde ich Themen wie Handelsbeschränkungen und Überkapazitäten ansprechen. Sie bereiten deutschen Unternehmen große Sorgen. Ich bin überzeugt, dass Deutschland und China beide ein Interesse an einem stabilen globalen Handel haben. Unternehmen brauchen dafür Kalkulierbarkeit und Sicherheit. Auf Dauer ist das nur gegeben, wenn alle die Regeln eines offenen und fairen internationalen Handels einhalten. Aber China-Politik trägt.
It's important to note that recent Chinese restrictions on its supplies of rare earths and semiconductors have exposed Europe's dependency on China in these key areas, further highlighting that the continent has failed to locate the supply of these components. Okay, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.